ear, Constellation piercings. Going to give you pros and cons, 5 of each. Also going to talk about what you should know beforehand. The piercing itself, healing, jewelry, living with the piercing, and what happens if you decide you don't want the thing and you want to take it out. Coming up next on Pros and Cons by a Piercer, Season 2, Episode number 31. So stick around. For those that are new to the channel, my name is DaVo. I'm a professional body piercer and have been since 1994. I own and I operate the Axiom Body Piercing Studio located right here in Des Moines, Iowa, inside Skin Kitchen Tattoo. So, when I talk to you about these things, I'm talking to a level of expertise that comes from being in the body piercing industry for well over 27 years. So what are we going to talk about today? What we're going to talk about is they're called Constellation piercings or various different names. Basically what they are is ear piercing groupings. Originally the idea was to actually do constellations like stars, like do those out like the Big Dipper and Orion and all that other stuff. What it has turned into is kind of a customization or curating of an ear, doing various different piercings that are combining different piercings into creating a new look. Usually done with stud jewelry, but sometimes can include rings and other things depending on what piercings are there. Now, these can be done, as I said, based on real constellations, but generally it has more to do with your anatomy and what's going to look right and what's going to enhance that area. These can also are often combined with existing piercings to kind of brighten up the area and add a lot more interest to it. Make it a little bit more interesting and a little bit more enhanced. History, this has kind of developed over the last 10 years, I would say. It's kind of turned into this thing that, well, how to put this? An easy way for people to separate people that don't know better from their money. It has turned into this endless thing of custom piercings and custom this and custom jewelry, which we'll get to later, doesn't really exist. And kind of charging people a phenomenal amount of money to do multiple ear piercings. Generally, the way this should be is you should pay probably the same amount you would if you're getting multiple piercings in that style. For example, like when I do ear piercings, usually the first one is full price. The second one I may knock $5 to $10 off just to give my clients a break and because I don't have to do another setup. So what I usually try to do is kind of work out an overall cost that's going to help them and not just totally take them to town. So let's get into what you came here for, the pros, the advantages, things we like about this style of piercing, and what makes us all go, hey, it'd be really cool to have some of these. Number one. No, most people can get this. Ear anatomies are vastly different from person to person, so it might dictate exactly what the combination is going to be. It really depends on how much room you have, what the shape of your ear is, and what your body can handle, tolerance-wise. So, but for most people, some form of these style of groupings can be done. Number two, I kind of already alluded to this, but these piercings can be combined with existing piercings to add to the area and increase the number of piercings that are in the area. For example, if you have an upper ear cartilage, we could do like additional piercings below around it to make it look like it's part of a group and was always meant to be part of a group. Number three, most of these piercings that we do to create this effect are established piercings, meaning they're going to heal fairly easy. They have a long history of healing. They're not prone to rejection. They're not prone to problems. Now, that I have to say with a little asterisk next to it, because if you're doing one of the piercings that's more of a high risk to rejection or increased problems with bumps and etc., then it kind of drops that easy heal down quite a bit. For example, if you're doing an antitrachus with a trachea and then some kind of conch, Anitrachuses can be a very difficult piercing to heal. They are prone to rejection. They're prone to scarring. They're prone to just being a pain. So it's going to take down that level of easy heal and establishment a little bit more. The same thing with you have like a snug that's included. So the more difficult that one piercing is in that grouping, that can affect the rest of them and affect the overall effect. Outcome, I guess would be a better word. Number 4. There's a large variety of options. There's a large amount of different types of ear piercings. There's a large amount of different placements for each one of those piercings. There is a endless combination of those piercings. And you can, when you take into account, especially with threadless post-style jewelry, there is tons of different jewelry options, styles, etc. The same thing goes for rings. You're not kind of like, even 15 years ago, you were pretty much stuck to, if you wanted a ring, it was either seamless, Cathy bead, or fixed. That's it. Now there's a huge variety of different types of rings out there, mainly thanks to like the segment rings or the hinged rings that have all kinds of crazy settings and weird stuff, multiple rings, stacked, fanned, all that stuff. So you have a lot more options. During the initial piercing, where I would generally stick to post-style jewelry for a majority of these and very simplistic jewelry, even with those, you're going to have a lot of different ends that you can choose from. Number 5, the last one. Changing the jewelry can drastically change the effect of how things look. So, for example, if you have like a multiple number of upper ear piercings and flats, if you change those out, just maybe 1 or 2 of them with a different gem color or a different style in, it's going to drastically change how all of that looks together. So it's something that if you get bored with it, you can change easily. It's not like you're locked into that style of jewelry and that's it. Now, before we move on to the cons and disadvantages, if you like this video, found it helpful, found it informative, share it, and also give us a thumbs up because we like it when you like it. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe, hit that notification bell so that you're notified every single time we post something. If you have one of these, or you have experience with it, or you have a question about these, please leave a comment. I generally try to answer them when I have time. Now it's time for the cons, the disadvantages, the things that we don't like, the things that make you go, no, wow, man, really? I don't want that. Starting with number 1, anatomy. Now, you may have in your mind's eye exactly what you think is going to be there, what type combination of piercings you're going to get, etc. But your ear may not be suitable for that combination. You have to kind of go into these expecting a little bit of give and take and also come in with a number of different options that you're interested in combinations. Sleeping. You cannot sleep on these. You're going to have multiple piercings in an area that is flexible often and is prone to problems. So you need to figure out a way that if you're doing one ear, that you're going to be able to isolate that, keep things away from it, not sleep on it, or elevate it off the bed. It's kind of one of those things there's no easy way to get around it. And this may continue even after all of the piercings are completely healed. Sometimes trauma with them can cause issues, even in a well-healed piercing. Also, it depends on the jewelry. Jewelry that has a higher profile is going to get knocked around more, of course, is going to be more acceptable to trauma. We'll get a little bit more into that when we get into jewelry, though. Because most of these piercings are through cartilage, which is more prone to issues like bumps. They are very fragile piercings. They're very grumpy piercings. They're piercings that don't like a lot of movement and action, so they're more prone to issues in that direction. So do take that into account before you get it, and think about that when you're choosing the selection of where it's at or placement. And number 5, the last one, the cost. Usually you can do this in sittings, but you have to understand that this is going to be an investment. If you're doing 5 or 6 piercings on one ear, it's going to cost 5 or 6 times what you would normally pay for one piercing. You might get a little bit of a discount here and there, depending on your piercer, depending on what they do, but they can be very expensive. The thing is, though, is curated ears and this weird, like, oh, it's a $500 an hour and all this stuff. Be very leery of that stuff, because even though they're telling you things like, we're giving you custom jewelry, we're doing this, we're doing that, the reality is they're really just doing a grouping of established piercings and using jewelry that they order in lots of 100. There's no way they can make a custom captive bead ring, or a custom gold seamless ring, or a custom threadless. Those things are made beforehand. They don't sit down there and go in the back and melt it down and form it and all that stuff and add the gems. They may pick the combinations of ends and etc. for that reason, but I that's a stretch of the imagination to call it custom. Before we move on to preparing for the piercing, check out our merch store. Links in the description. We have various different designs and various different products in a lot of different colors and variety. Link is in the description. There's also one of those merch bars down below. Now let's talk about things to consider or things you should look for. The first one being is that your piercer is knowledgeable, experienced, has done this before, and is somebody that you actually want to be in the same room with. Are they professional? Are they personable? Do they answer questions? Do they educate you? Are they open and willing to share information with you? Do they give a consultation where they sit down verbally and talk to you about maybe some of the issues that's going to be with this and what you're going to need to do to take care of it and what that responsibility is going to involve and possibly any problems in the future. Next up, the piercer should evaluate your area. And I usually, like if I'm doing a consultation on this, I will mark them out in advance during the consultation. And the reason being is that this way we're both on the same page prior to anything going further. I use surgical markers, so it stays on pretty well, sometimes a little too well, as in you'll see it 3-4 days afterwards because it slowly comes off. But even with that mark on there, it's easy to disinfect over it. It's not going to cause problems. It's not going to cause issues. But we're both going to be on the same page right from the beginning. This is what you want, and this is what we're going to go for. The piercer should ask for your input. I know that the part of the allure of this is that they're going to customize your ear to look like some fancy thing. They should also ask you about your input. Otherwise, they're just going to do the same thing on you over and over again on 50 different people and try to say that it's different each time. You really should, they should talk to them about what you like and don't like. Of course, with jewelry selection, go through that with them and help them pick out what you would like and put your part into it. It's supposed to be a collaborative effort. It takes 2 people to do a piercing, not just 1, but 2. So make it that collaborative effort, and you're going to come out with better results than you would if you go, I don't care what you do, just go ahead and do it. Now, your jewelry should your piercer should have the proper type of jewelry. Every piercing is a little bit different. Probably the most common use with these are in flats areas or in the ridged area there with the anti-helix and the lobe. So most of that's done with straight post style jewelry. That's what it should be done with. I would suggest threadless, and the reason why is because threadless tends to be a little quicker and it's easier to insert that pin than it is to screw something on. So usually there's less trauma to the area. Rings, yeah, if it involves maybe a daith piercing, which is kind of one of those piercings that does well with rings, it may not be an issue, but if you're doing anything on the outside of the ear, it's best to start out with studs and then switch to rings after it heals. If you are wanting to wear rings, your piercer should talk to you about that and create a situation where that ring's going to look good after the piercing's healed. Healing out with rings and upper ear cartilage piercings, I've had thousands upon thousands of people do it. However, it is much harder, much more difficult, and takes much longer for them to get to the point where they don't bother you. And also they're more prone to bumps, they're more prone to issues because you have something out there that twists back and forth and is constantly being bumped. Now, Curved barbells, if you're doing certain areas like snugs, rooks, and etc., are a best option. But yeah, the jewelry should match the piercing you're doing. Just because you're doing a Constellation piercing, there's still always that possibility that you may have to come back later to have the correct jewelry put in, so to speak, after the map. So always walk in with that idea. Now, another thing you need to know is whether or not your piercer supplies written instructions or verbal instructions on how to properly take care of the piercing. And do they have aftercare product, or can they point you in the direction of where you need to pick that up? Most common thing you're going to be looking for is Neilmed or Nelmed sterile saline solution, either the piercing aftercare that comes out in a fine mist or the wound wash, which generally comes out in a spray. So one of those two things is your best option. It's a good idea to pick that up in advance. Of course, if your piercer sells it, it's much easier just to pick it up from them. They're probably going to give you a little bit of a break. Some cases, some piercers just supply it with the piercing. It's just included in the price. Lastly, your piercer should give you a complete price in advance. They should tell you exactly how much everything's going to cost before they start the piercing. They should not do any of this bait and switch nonsense. If you're doing like 4 piercings and it costs this much to do 4 piercings, they should tell you that beforehand. There shouldn't be any surprises. Now let's move on to the piercing itself. First thing they're going to do is give you a consultation, of course, and we've talked a little about what will be discussed during that. Then you'll go through the jewelry selection. Basically, it's not a bad idea, depending on which piercing it is, to have a little bit of knowledge about what's going to work or not work. Ask them a lot of questions if you are leery of them putting 1 or 2 pieces in, especially if they start pulling out rings. Next up, the waiver. Now, during the waiver, it's kind of like the piercing consultation, part 2. That waiver will ask about any products they're using during the healing process, if you have any type of allergic reactions to them. It's also going to talk to you about metal allergies, if you have any, which they probably should have already asked you. It's going to ask about any health issues you may have. Now, understand that if you do have health issues or pre-existing conditions like diabetes, hemophilia, blood clotting problems, anemia, we don't know how that's going to affect your healing. You need to speak to your doctor about that. Same thing goes for medications, especially blood thinners. You need to discuss that with your medical care professional. We don't know your history. We don't know how that dose of medication is affecting your ability to clot, your blood to clot, so it's best to talk to them. We give you a little bit of advice, but sometimes the bottom line is, we're not doctors. Next up, they'll set up the area, set up their equipment, disinfect the area. If they haven't marked already, they'll do that. Have you take a look at it. I generally suggest when looking at markings, look at them fairly up close and then at arm's length. The reason being is that most people see at arm's length. That's what your average person is going to see it by, but with ear piercings especially, people tend to see them a little bit closer because you show it off and they look. But it's a good idea to look at it close and far. Ask for second opinions if there's somebody else in the room and get that best mark for you. If you're not happy with one of those placements, talk to them about moving it. Ask them why they chose that spot. They should have a decent answer for it. Most of these piercings are done freehand, using either cork or a needle receiving tube. The piercing is done straight through with the needle going straight through. If it is threaded or threadless jewelry, a guide pin will be used to insert the jewelry. So generally what will happen, the piercing's done, then a taper pin or a guide pin is pushed through to push the needle out. The jewelry is attached to that guide pin. The jewelry is put in, then the ends applied or put on the jewelry. Basically, pretty quick, but understand that as you do each additional piercing, you might notice a slight increase in discomfort. It's like your nervous system is on overdrive each time you hurt yourself. Like the first couple times, it's kind of like, yeah, you shouldn't probably do this. And then the second time, they're like, yep, you need to stop doing this. And the third time, they're going, no, you need to stop this. So do prepare for that mentally. It's probably not going to be as bad as you think it's going to be, but do understand they do increase in pain, discomfort a little bit. Now, you might notice a little bit of slight bleeding off and on for the first few minutes. Usually we try to stop that before you leave. There's going to be possibly some throbbing and aching depending on the piercing. Usually that fades in a few minutes. And then it's going to be tender to the touch, anywhere from a week to 10 days. That varies greatly from person to person, but it's kind of a reminder that you need to avoid contact with those piercings. With that out of the way, let's talk about healing. Average healing time on a majority of these piercings is anywhere from 3 to 6 months, longer, during which time you're going to probably be cleaning twice daily using a sterile saline spray, which I already mentioned. Practicing cross-contamination prevention, which will include washing your hands before you handle it, no oral contact, no exchange of bodily fluids on or around the piercing, keeping your environment clean, clothing, bedding, towels, not submerging the piercing in bodies of water you can't control the quality of, means no swimming. Keep pets away from it, don't let them sleep in the bed with you, and don't sleep on the piercing. Make sure you're sleeping on your side or your back. Avoid obsessive playing or touching or moving. Find a way to elevate it off the bed. If you have to sleep on that side, it's usually best just to sleep on the other side until all of them are completely healed. Avoid contact with unclean objects. When I talk about with that is going to be anything that comes in contact with that area. Make sure that you're, like telephones, headphones, earbuds, everything. Make sure that your hair is completely dry before it comes in contact with the piercings. For the first roughly 3 to 5 days, it's not uncommon to see redness, discolorization, heat, tenderness to the touch, inflammation, and maybe a tad bit of bleeding first couple nights. Now let's move on to jewelry. Jewelry should be left in at all times. Regardless of which piercing it is or how long you've had it, it's best to leave jewelry in. If the jewelry is oversized for any reason, it should be downsized once the piercings heal. Leaving that longer post in there is just going to increase the amount of contact it gets. If you're in a situation where it's constantly getting snagged during the healing process, it's sometimes best, if you're past that swelling period, to come in, go to your piercer, and have them dial and size the jewelry a little bit early just to be on the safe side, kind of keep it from getting knocked around a lot. Jewelry should not, or it should be avoided having, or you should understand, jewelry that has sharp edges, points, things dangling off of it is more likely to get caught on things. More simplistic jewelry is not going to. So you kind of have to look at it this way. If you're going to have things on there that have sharp edges, things hanging off of it, and things that are easy to snag, you need to keep your clothing away from it, your bedding away from it, car doors, whatever, and you also need to keep your hair away from it. So keep that in mind when picking out and selecting jewelry, where the placement is, what's going to happen. Now, the best jewelry for most options is, like I said earlier, labret studs, especially on flat piercings. I think the disc in the back is most comfortable. Threadless is best, just basically because it's easier to change and it's less prone to cause trauma when it is changed, because you don't have to sit there and tighten anything on. Less movement, less trauma. If you're going to wear a ring in any of those piercings, and maybe that was the original plan, I really suggest until that piercing is completely seasoned not to put the ring in. Seasoning is usually twice the period of time it takes to heal the piercing. And what happens during that period of time is your body thickens up that tissue, but it also expands the piercing a little bit, which is going to give a little bit more leeway from going from something that's perfectly straight to something that's curved. Sometimes if you do that and you put the ring in too quickly, it will cause agitation. You'll suddenly get bumps on it. And really the only way to solve the problem is go back to the old jewelry and wait. Living with the piercing. Jewelry, once again, should be left in at all times. Sleeping on the piercing may cause issues even long after the piercing is healed. It's not uncommon, especially with cartilage piercings, and if you're wearing rings in them, that 20, 30 years afterwards, if you sleep on them wrong, you wake up the next morning, they hurt. So it's best to kind of plan accordingly. It may cause you to adjust your sleeping habits. You never know. Any type of jewelry, whether or not it's threadless or threaded, you probably want to check to make sure that end is on tight. Sometimes just general wear will cause them to loosen up. They fall off at the worst possible times, and then you're off to your piercer to get a replacement part, and they aren't always cheap. Now let's talk about abandoning the piercing. If the piercing is if it's during the healing process and it's healthy and there's no signs of infection, removing the jewelry shouldn't be an issue. It'll close pretty rapidly. Do keep an eye on it and treat it like any other open wound you may have on your body. If there are signs of infection, see your doctor or piercer before removing the jewelry. There is always a risk that if you remove the jewelry and it's infected, that your body will seal over the 2 wounds and trap that infected tissue and fluids inside your body, basically trapping it there, which means you have to go see a physician and have it lanced and drained. The way your body heals infections is by pushing infected tissue and fluids out through the wound while replacing with healthy tissue. When you block that area, it causes it causes problems. Now, if the piercing is well healed, removing the jewelry will cause it to slowly close, usually reconnecting in the center and then filling outward. It may appear open for years afterwards, usually leaving a small indentation scar. Sometimes sebum may collect in there, which is a oily, waxy substance, kind of like cottage cheese, or not cottage cheese, cream cheese, and has a very nasty odor to it. It doesn't mean you have an infection or any other problem. It's perfectly fine. Well, that's all I have to say about Constellation piercings. Till next time, here's hoping to be piercings heal with ease and without a single issue. And if you're in the Des Moines, Iowa area, I hope to see your body piercing needs in the future. Have a good day, everybody. Take care. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.